Commander Marcus Chen had asked himself that question exactly 47 times since arriving at orbital station Artemis 9, and he still didn't have an answer. The transport pod had barely finished docking when his comm unit buzzed with an urgent priority message from Galactic Command: assess the threat level. Recommend neutralization protocols. Return within 72 hours. Simple enough, he thought, until he walked into Containment Bay 7 and saw her. She was sitting cross-legged on the cold, metallic floor, her platinum-silver hair cascading down her back like liquid moonlight, and in her arms were three of the most terrifyingly classified creatures in the known universe. They were purring. Actually purring, like they were house cats instead of biological weapons capable of wiping out entire solar systems. The young woman looked up at him with luminescent violet eyes that seemed to glow softly in the dim bay lighting, and Marcus felt his carefully prepared speech evaporate like water on a hot engine core. Her ears, delicately pointed and elegant, twitched slightly as she registered his presence, and a small smile curved her lips. "You must be the one they sent to kill my babies," she said, her voice carrying a musical quality that reminded him of wind chimes in a summer breeze. And there was no accusation in her tone, just a gentle knowing that made something in his chest tighten uncomfortably. He opened his mouth to protest, to explain that he was here for assessment only. But one of the cubs lifted its head and fixed him with eyes that shifted through colors like auroras dancing across a midnight sky. And for a moment, Marcus forgot how to breathe. Her name was Vera, and she was the last surviving member of the Lunari people, a race known throughout the galaxy for their ability to form emotional bonds with any sentient creature, no matter how dangerous. She had arrived at the station 3 months ago with the predator cub stuffed inside her jacket, half frozen and barely alive, having rescued them from a crashed military vessel that had been transporting them to a weapons testing facility. They were going to use them as living bombs, she explained to Marcus later that first day, her slender fingers stroking the soft iridescent fur of the smallest cub, the one she called Echo. Their species, the Voraxians, they bond with a handler during infancy, and whoever they bond with, they protect with their lives. The military wanted to bond them to soldiers and then deploy them as extinction-level weapons. Marcus watched as Echo stretched and yawned, revealing rows of teeth that looked like polished obsidian, and despite himself, he felt a warmth spreading through him as the little creature made a sound somewhere between a chirp and a purr. The other two cubs, whom Vera had named Whisper and Storm, were equally disarming in their affection, constantly tumbling over each other and pawing at Vera's boots with their two large paws. They looked like a cross between wolf pups and lion cubs, their fur shifting colors with their moods, currently a peaceful lavender that Vera said indicated contentment. How could these creatures be galaxy-level threats? Marcus wondered, watching Storm chase his own tail in circles until he collapsed in a dizzy heap. And then he made the mistake of reading their combat files. The data scrolled across his personal tablet that night in his assigned quarters, and with each line he read, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Voraxian predator species, Omega-class threat. Biological capabilities include molecular destabilization through concentrated energy discharge. Maximum recorded damage output, complete annihilation of the Kepler-4b colony, population 2.3 million, in under 6 standard minutes. Regenerative capabilities render conventional weapons ineffective. Only documented vulnerability, emotional trauma upon loss of bonded handler. Marcus set down the tablet and stared at the wall, his mind racing. The tiny creatures he had watched roll around on the floor like puppies were capable of destroying worlds. The smallest one, Echo, the one who had climbed into his lap unbidden that afternoon and fallen asleep while he talked with Vera about her homeworld, had an estimated threat rating higher than a fleet of warships. He thought about Vera's smile, the way her skin glowed softly in the low light, the genuine love in her eyes when she looked at the cubs. She knew, she had to know what they were, what they could do. And yet she cared for them anyway, sang to them in her native language at night, made them toys out of spare ship parts. Was she naive? He wondered, or was she the bravest person he had ever met? The next morning, Marcus found Vera in the station's cramped mess hall, a cup of something steaming between her hands and dark circles under her luminescent eyes. "You read the files," she said, without looking up, and it wasn't a question. He sat down across from her, noticing how the cubs were nowhere to be seen, probably still sleeping in the heated nest she had built for them in Containment Bay 7. "Vera, they killed millions of people. Those files, the documentation, it's not speculation. It happened. She finally met his gaze, and he was surprised to see, not denial, but a profound sadness reflected in those otherworldly violet depths. They were 3 weeks old when that happened, she said quietly. Their original handler was killed in front of them. They were terrified, traumatized, lashing out at everything they perceived as a threat. That's what happens when a Voraxian bond is severed violently. They lose control. She paused, her fingers tightening around her cup. They didn't choose to become weapons, Marcus. They were born into a universe that wanted to use them for destruction. But they can also choose love. They can choose protection instead of annihilation. All they need is someone to show them that choice exists. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to point out that the risk was too enormous, that no amount of love could guarantee those cubs wouldn't one day unleash their catastrophic power again. But something in her voice, a raw honesty that cut through his military training and straight to the heart of him, made him hesitate. The days that followed were the strangest of Marcus's career. Instead of writing his threat assessment report, he found himself spending hours in Containment Bay 7, watching Vera work with the cubs. Her methods were unlike anything he had seen in his years of xenobiological training. She would place her palm against each cub's forehead and close her eyes, her skin glowing brighter as she established what she called an emotional bridge. Through this connection, she could sense their feelings, their fears, their memories. She showed Marcus once, pressing her fingertips to his temple, and suddenly he understood. He felt Echo's terror during the colony incident, the overwhelming grief and confusion, the desperate need for safety that had manifested as destruction. He felt Whisper's chronic anxiety, always watching the door, waiting for soldiers to come and take them away again. He felt Storm's fierce protective instinct, the way he positioned himself between his siblings and any perceived threat. They weren't monsters, Marcus realized with a jolt that left him shaken. They were children. Traumatized, impossibly powerful children who had never been given a chance to be anything other than weapons. That night, he sat on the floor of the containment bay while all 3 cubs piled into his lap, their fur cycling through shades of peaceful blue and contented gold. And Vera laughed at his bewildered expression. "They like you," she said, her smile lighting up her features in a way that made his heart stutter. "Voraxians are excellent judges of character. They wouldn't trust you if you had any intention of hurting them." He looked down at Echo, who was gnawing contentedly on his bootlace, and felt something shift inside him. A wall he hadn't known existed, beginning to crumble. But peace never lasts in the depths of space. On the 5th day, a galactic command cruiser dropped out of hyperspace less than 10,000 kilometers from Station Artemis 9, and Admiral Helena Cross's face appeared on every screen in the facility. "Commander Chen, your assessment was due 48 hours ago." Explain the delay. Marcus stood in the command center, acutely aware of Vera watching him from the doorway, her face pale beneath its natural luminescence. He could lie, he thought. He could tell the Admiral what she wanted to hear, classify the cubs as immediate threats requiring neutralization. He could follow orders like he had done his entire career. But then he thought of Echo's trusting eyes, Whisper's tentative purr when she finally let him pet her, Storm's protective stance whenever anyone new entered the bay. He thought of Vera's belief that love could overcome even the darkest origins. And he thought of the person he wanted to be versus the person military protocol demanded. "Admiral," he said carefully, "my assessment is incomplete. These subjects are not inherent threats. They're responsive to proper handling and emotional stabilization. With appropriate care, they could be valuable allies rather than weapons requiring destruction." The Admiral's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Commander, you seem to have forgotten the destruction of Kepler for to be. Those creatures are walking extinction events. Your orders are to neutralize the threat and return to base." "That is not a request." The screen went dark, and Marcus stood frozen, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him like the gravity of a dying star. Vera was already moving when he found her, frantically gathering supplies into a worn travel pack while the cubs circled her feet, sensing her distress. Their fur had shifted to an anxious orange, and Storm kept emitting low growls toward the main corridor. "They're coming," she said, not pausing in her packing. "I've been through this before, Marcus. Different station, different officer, same outcome. They want the cubs dead or controlled, and I won't let either happen." He caught her arm, gently, and she stopped, her chest heaving with barely controlled fear. "Then we go together," he heard himself say, and the words surprised him as much as they surprised her. "I have access codes for the emergency shuttle. We can be in hyperspace before they dock." She stared at him, those violet eyes searching his face for deception, and he realized with sudden clarity that she had been alone for so long. Alone with her convictions, alone with her impossible mission, alone with the weight of protecting creatures that the entire galaxy wanted destroyed. When she found whatever she was looking for in his expression, her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't even know me. You could lose everything. Your career, your standing, your freedom." He reached up and gently brushed a strand of silver hair from her face, his fingertips tingling where they met her luminescent skin. "Because you showed me that the things we're taught to fear aren't always worthy of that fear," he said. "And because some things are worth losing everything for." The escape from Station Artemis 9 was chaos, wrapped in adrenaline and desperate prayer. Marcus led them through maintenance corridors. He remembered from the station schematics, the cubs surprisingly silent as they followed Vera's whispered commands. When they reached the shuttle bay, 2 soldiers were already stationed at the entrance, their weapons raised. Marcus felt Vera tense beside him, felt the shift in the cubs' demeanor as their fur darkened to a threatening crimson. "No," Vera breathed, dropping to her knees and gathering all 3 cubs against her chest. "No, my loves. This isn't the way. We don't hurt people. We never hurt people." She was crying now, tears sliding down her glowing cheeks, and Marcus watched something incredible happen. The cubs listened. Their fur slowly shifted back through the color spectrum, from crimson to orange to yellow to a calm, resigned blue. They trusted her, he realized. More than their own instincts, more than their biological imperatives, they trusted her judgment. He stepped forward, hands raised, and addressed the soldiers. "I'm Commander Marcus Chen, authorization code Theta-79. I'm taking this shuttle for emergency medical evacuation." "Stand down." The soldiers hesitated, uncertain protocols warring with direct orders, and in that moment of hesitation, Marcus lunged for the door controls. Alarms blared as the shuttle bay sealed behind them, and within 90 seconds, they were rocketing away from the station and into the vast darkness of space. The first hyperspace jump took them to the edges of contested space, a region where galactic command's authority grew thin and independent colonies thrived on the fringes of civilization. Vera had contacts there, she explained, people who believed, as she did, that no creature deserved to be judged solely by its potential for destruction. Marcus watched her sleep during the long transit hours, the cubs curled around her like a living blanket, and he marveled at the path his life had taken. 1 week ago, he had been a decorated commander with a spotless record, destined for admiralty if he played his cards right. Now he was a fugitive, his career in ruins, wanted for treason against galactic command. And yet, watching Vera's peaceful expression, feeling Echo's warm weight against his leg, where the smallest cub had claimed him as a secondary comfort object, he couldn't find it in himself to regret anything. This was right. For the first time in his life, he was absolutely certain that what he was doing was right. The colony on Meridian 7 was unlike anything Marcus had imagined. Built into the crystalline caves of a low-gravity moon, it was a sanctuary for the galaxy's forgotten and feared. He saw species he had only read about in classified documents, creatures that command had ordered exterminated, living peacefully alongside the colony's human and humanoid residents. Children played in the iridescent corridors, some of them clearly hybrids. That would have been impossible under command's strict breeding regulations. And at the center of it all was a woman named Dr. Amara Torres, who embraced Vera like a long-lost daughter and looked at the cubs with knowing, compassionate eyes. "You did well, Vera," she said, her weathered face creasing into a warm smile. 3 more souls saved from the galaxy's fear. She turned to Marcus, studying him with an intensity that made him want to straighten his posture despite himself. "And you brought a believer. Even better." He didn't feel like a believer, not yet. He felt like a man who had jumped off a cliff and was still waiting to see whether he would fly or fall. But Vera slipped her hand into his, her fingers warm and slightly tingly against his skin, and he decided that maybe the falling was part of the flying dot in the weeks that followed. Marcus learned more about the Voraxians than any military file had ever taught him. Under Vera's patient guidance, he watched the cubs grow, their powers developing alongside their emotional intelligence. Echo learned to create small shields of protective energy, manifesting them as shimmering bubbles around insects she wanted to observe without harming. Whisper developed an uncanny ability to sense approaching danger and communicate warnings through a form of telepathic projection. Storm, the most powerful of the three, learned to channel his destructive potential into constructive force, using molecular destabilization to clear blocked tunnels in the colony's expansion efforts. They were still dangerous, Marcus knew. Their files didn't lie about what they were capable of at full power. But danger was not the same as malice. A thunderstorm was dangerous. A solar flare was dangerous. That didn't make them evil, didn't mean they should be destroyed simply for existing. Vera had been right all along. Given the choice between love and destruction, the cubs chose love every single time. And as Marcus watched them play in the crystalline gardens, their fur shifting through a rainbow of happy colors, he understood that the galaxy's greatest mistake wasn't creating these creatures. It was assuming that power automatically meant threat. The message from Galactic Command arrived on a quiet evening, encrypted and traced with difficulty through 17 relay stations. Admiral Cross's voice was ice and fury as she delivered her ultimatum: surrender the Voraxian subjects and Marcus Chen within 30 standard days, or face the consequences of harboring fugitives and biological weapons. The colony leaders gathered in the central hall, their faces grave as they discussed options. Marcus expected fear, expected accusations, expected to be asked to leave before he brought destruction down upon their hidden sanctuary. Instead, he found unity. "We've faced threats before, Doctor," Torres said calmly, her voice carrying through the crowded hall. "We exist because we refuse to let fear dictate who deserves to live and who deserves to die. Commander Chen and Vera and those cubs are part of our family now. And family doesn't surrender. Family." The cheers that followed were deafening, and Marcus felt Vera's grip tighten on his hand, her eyes shining with grateful tears. The battle, when it came, was nothing like Marcus had anticipated. Galactic Command sent 3 cruisers, enough firepower to reduce the moon to rubble. But they hadn't counted on the colony's allies. Ships emerged from hyperspace bearing the flags of a dozen independent systems, civilizations that Command had written off as primitive or inconsequential, all of them answering Meridian 70's call for aid. And they hadn't counted on the cubs. Vera had worked with them for months, preparing for this moment, and when the first landing pods touched down in the crystal caves, the Voraxians acted not as weapons, but as guardians. Echo's shields protected the colony's civilians, shimmering barriers that absorbed the energy of Command's weapons and dispersed it harmlessly. Whisper's telepathic warnings gave the defenders advance notice of every tactical movement, turning the battle into a strategic disaster for the invaders. And Storm, magnificent and terrifying Storm, positioned himself at the colony's main entrance and unleashed just enough of his power to collapse the tunnel behind the retreat of the Command forces, sealing them out without killing a single soldier. It was precision. It was restraint. It was everything Vera had believed they could become. When it was over, when the Command cruisers retreated and the colony erupted in celebration, Marcus found Vera standing at the edge of the crystal gardens, the cubs playing in the starlight that filtered through the transparent ceiling. She looked exhausted but triumphant, her silver hair disheveled and her tactical pants torn at one knee, but her smile was radiant as he approached. "They did it," she said softly, watching Storm tackle his sisters in a tumbling pile of iridescent fur. "They could have destroyed those ships, Marcus. They had the power to annihilate everything Command sent against us. But they chose mercy. They chose protection without destruction." He stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and something crystallized in his heart as he looked at the scene before him. "You did it," he corrected gently. "You believed in them when no one else would. You loved them when the whole galaxy wanted them dead." She turned to face him, her luminescent skin glowing softly in the starlight, and there was something vulnerable and hopeful in her violet eyes that made his breath catch. "I couldn't have done it alone," she said. "I've been alone for so long, Marcus, carrying this mission, fighting for creatures no one else thought worthy of saving. And then you walked into that containment bay, and everything changed." He reached out, cupping her face in his hands, marveling at the warmth of her skin, the gentle tingle of her natural luminescence against his palms. "You taught me something I should have learned a long time ago," he said, his voice rough with emotion. The most dangerous things in the universe aren't the ones with the most power. They're the ones who convince us that power is the only thing that matters. But love, Vera, love is stronger than fear. Compassion is stronger than destruction. And believing in something, truly believing, even when the whole galaxy says you're wrong, that's the most powerful force there is. The cubs, sensing the emotional significance of the moment, stopped their play and padded over, surrounding Marcus and Vera in a warm circle of shifting colors. Echo made her chirping purr, pressing her head against Marcus's leg, and he laughed despite the tears threatening to spill from his eyes. I think they approve, Vera said, her own voice trembling with joy. And when she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his in a soft, sweet kiss, the cubs erupted in a cacophony of happy sounds that echoed through the crystal caves like music. They stood there together, two fugitives and three so-called monsters, surrounded by a community that had chosen love over fear and survived because of it. Marcus didn't know what the future held. Galactic Command would regroup, would try again, would never stop seeing the cubs as threats requiring neutralization. But as Vera nestled against his chest, her pointed ears brushing his chin, and the cubs settled into a contented pile at their feet, he realized that the future didn't scare him anymore. Because he had finally learned the truth that Vera had known all along. The truth she had risked everything to prove. The galaxy measures danger by destruction. But real strength is measured by what you choose not to destroy. By what you choose to love instead. And in the starlit crystal gardens of Meridian 7, surrounded by creatures the universe called monsters, and the woman who had taught him that love was the only force worth believing in, Commander Marcus Chen finally understood what it meant to be truly brave.